And now we are going to get into our Q&A. I'll kick us off with our first question. And as a reminder, if you didn't get your questions in by yesterday's deadline, they are still received and they will be answered at our next First Friday event in September. So if you don't hear the answer to your question, make sure you tune in for that. Okay, our first question is from a board member. They're asking if there is a law that requires all parks within the community to be cleaned by an outside ROC licensed vendor. This person looked through our cheat sheets and did not find any information on this. The firm is not aware of any law that requires this, but it is our opinion that it's always best practice to use licensed, insured, bonded contractors for any work that's done within the association. Question 2, a condo owner received permission to install a security door from this association's architectural review committee. It was discovered months later that the owner didn't add the door. He installed it as a replacement for the interior door that is a limited common element. The new door has glass windows and does not comply with the building code that requires a 30-90 burn time. What is the best way to handle this? So we would need to take a look at the CC&Rs in the ARC application to give a specific opinion on this. But generally speaking, when an owner installs something on their unit that wasn't approved or violates documents or city code, we recommend having our firm sending them a letter informing the owner that the change is not approved and that the owner needs to restore the change back to its original condition or seek written approval from the ACC for a new door that does meet the requirements of the association's documents and those relevant city codes.
All right, I'll jump in for the next couple questions here. The next question looks like it's from a board member. This question says, our HOA has recently encountered a request for a detached casita to be built. We have granted additions to existing structures, but do not want individual buildings added. Is it sufficient to reject the request, or do we need to alter our CC&Rs? We don't allow short-term rentals of existing structures either. Do we need to specifically say no casita rentals as well, or are we covered? All right, so great question. Thank you for submitting that. To answer your question, our firm would probably need to do a more thorough review of your association's CC&Rs, specifically the provisions on the Architectural Control Committee and accessory structures to adequately answer this question. The board may be able to deny the application based upon the existing language in the CC&Rs, or it may have to propose an amendment to the CC&Rs to clarify this. But if you'd like us to evaluate that a little further, please feel free to send us your association's documents and reach out to our firm so that we can discuss this with you further. All right, so our next question is also from a board member. This one asks, are HOA governing document violation notices confidential? So this is a good question as well. The answer is probably not. Violation notices are considered a book or record of the association under Arizona law. And based on that, our firm doesn't think that this falls under personal information about an owner. Therefore, if an owner is reaching out and requesting violation notices, we do recommend that the association treat this as an official book or record of the association and turn over those documents.
Thanks for answering that one, Haidyn. We get that question pretty often. Our next question is from a member of the board of directors for a condominium, and they ask, when a claim is submitted by an owner under the HOA insurance policy for repairs to their individual unit, who is responsible to pay the deductible, the owner or the HOA? Honestly, this one really depends. Your association's attorney can look over the facts and circumstances surrounding the damage. A big determining factor is how the damage was caused. So if the damage was caused by the owner, for example, maybe a grease fire, then the owner might be responsible to pay the deductible. Alternatively, if the damage was caused by, for example, a broken common area or common elements pipe, then it would likely be the association that's responsible for paying the deductible. It's important to note that the deductible is usually just subtracted off the amount that the insurance company will pay for the total cost of repairs. Our next question is also from another board member, and they ask that our board has a fiduciary duty to develop and meet a budget, but unexpected maintenance has required us to use reserve funds for urgent needs. How quickly should these funds be repaid? Our CCNRs limit our ability to increase HOA fees enough to cover rising costs of operating the association, which makes it difficult to fund both daily expenses and reserves. We had a reserve study done a few years ago, but with costs increasing, what legal guidelines exist regarding reserve contributions? This is a question I would check with your CPA to see if there's any specific requirements on repaying any money that you borrowed from your reserve account. If the board isn't able to repay the borrowed money due to financial shortfalls, the board may need to get advice from its legal counsel regarding the procedure to increase assessment rate, maybe assessing a special assessment, the possibility of obtaining a loan even. The best advice that our firm can give on reserve studies and reserve funding is to always hire a qualified professional, a reserve specialist, to update the reserve studies at least every 3 years. If your board needs help interpreting the reserve study, you can always hire the reserve company to come to a board meeting and to walk through the results of that study with the board.
All right, awesome. So our next question is also from a board member. The question says, can the president and or the management company spend HOA money without board votes and without transparency, then get permission after the fact? Is this legal? Can we ask the president to reimburse the HOA for these unauthorized expenses? And how can we prevent this? So thank you for your question. To answer that, we would say that absent emergency circumstances, board should authorize expenditures by majority vote at a board meeting to make sure that they're fully complying with the Arizona open meeting law. It's possible that a majority of your board needs to vote at an open board meeting on what expenditures are allowable without board approval. Just so that that situation is understood going forward. For example, maybe a dollar limit would be established so that the board knows what they can go forward with without approval. But approving expenditures after the fact is something that our firm typically doesn't encourage, but we do understand that sometimes it needs to be done so that there's a paper trail of that decision-making process. So in short, our firm can't comment on whether or not that you would request that payment back from that board member for the unauthorized expenses until we know a little bit more about the expenses and the prior course and dealings of the association with regard to expenses of that nature. So this would just we would need a little bit more information to evaluate that fully. All right, so the next question is also from a board member, and this question says, when a board adopts a policy for investing reserves in certificates of deposits, do the bylaws have to be updated? Can the policy leave open how the interest is to be used? Okay, so since we haven't reviewed your association's bylaws, it's a little difficult to answer, but I will say that most bylaws don't address investment of association funds. So as such, it's unlikely that the bylaws need to be amended to reference the new investment policy. Since an association is not required to adopt an investment policy, how to use the interest is usually up to the board, as long as it's used on association expenses or placed in the association's checking or reserve account. Over the past few years, CDs have been renewed with higher than normal interest rates, which has resulted in some associations receiving a windfall in interest, and thus has resulted in some tax liability for some associations. So interest rates do appear to be going down, so the windfall won't last forever.
Thanks, Haidyn. That's another popular question we get. Our next question is from an owner, and they ask, are there any Arizona statutes or laws that govern community management companies? Our community management shows inconsistency in advising or following the community documents, such as the CCNRs, bylaws, or the Planned Communities Act in Chapter 16 of Title 33 of the Arizona statute. In short, no, there are no laws that regulate management companies in Arizona right now. Our next question comes from a board member, and they ask, how prevalent is HOAs investing reserve funds in tax-exempt municipal bonds in order to avoid the 30% federal tax rate for HOAs filing on IRS Form 1120-H, who are the major financial advisors to HOAs that are knowledgeable in tax-exempt investing. I believe this board member might be a CPA, which explains the level of in-depth of this question, but our firm doesn't really receive a lot of questions about investing in tax-exempt municipal bonds, so we definitely recommend touching base with a CPA to exactly determine what investments are appropriate for the association. And then you can also find out from your management company if they have recommendations on financial advisors for HOAs and condos. Again, this isn't a question that we typically field, but that said, it's important to note that we do always recommend that investments by an association should be some on the lower level of risk range, especially if it's the majority or the entire reserve fund.
Awesome. And I will wrap it up with today's last question for our Q&A. Just a reminder, as Madeline did mention before, if your question was submitted and it somehow wasn't included today, that will be answered at our firm's virtual First Friday event in September. So please tune in for that if you didn't hear the answer to your question today. Okay, so this last question is from a board member. The question says, we have a new management company as of 2025. There are 17 boxes that we are paying monthly storage fees for, probably really old stuff. How far back should we keep records? All right, well, thank you for the question. Our firm does have a cheat sheet on records retention that will be helpful to you in determining what records to keep and what records to toss. Without knowing specifically what's in those 17 boxes, it's a little hard for us to comment today on what records should be retained or tossed, but hopefully this cheat sheet will give you a little bit more information and help you out in that process. Okay, so with that does conclude our Q&A portion today. It does look like we had 232 viewers at peak today during the presentation, which is a new record for us for 2025. So thank you all for being here with us today. We really appreciate it, and we love hanging out with you and giving you a little bit of helpful information, hopefully. As a few closing remarks, I will go ahead and remind you about our firm's First Friday events. Our next First Friday event will take place on September 5th at 9 a.m., where Beth Mulcahy will be rapid fire answering questions live via Zoom and on Mulcahy Law Firm's Facebook page. Next, we've got some information regarding September class number 9. This will be taking place Tuesday, September 16th at 11 a.m. from 11 to 12. And this will also take place on Zoom and Facebook Live. Now, this is the 2025 Legislative Update, Insurance Challenges, and Community Safety. So this session will provide an easy-to-understand overview of the new legislation affecting HOA and condo boards. And we will address the current insurance challenges facing HOAs and condos and offer some practical tips on preventing crime and limiting your association's liability. So please tune in for that. Next, we do have some information on the Scottsdale Neighborhood College, which is going to be an in-person event, which will take place on Thursday, September 18th, 2025. It's going to be from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m., and this will be located at the Mustang Library. The address is 10101 North 90th Street in Scottsdale, Arizona. So please feel free to join us for that. That will be regarding the 2025 legislative update and how to effectively work with your community manager. So in that session, Beth Mulcahy will provide an easy-to-understand overview of the latest laws impacting Arizona HOAs and condos. Then she'll go ahead and dive into the unique relationship between associations and management companies, tackling common hurdles and providing practical solutions. The secret ingredient to success: teamwork. Join us to gain insights to stay ahead of the new laws and learn strategies for building a strong, effective partnership with your community manager. And also feel free to contact the City of Scottsdale with any questions on that. So with that does conclude our presentation for today. Thank you all again for joining us. We do hope that you have a great end to your summer, and we hope to see you at one of our upcoming events coming soon. So have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.